they were getting so many calls from people who were canceling their monthly donation because they couldn't afford it. It was now our donors, in some cases, are now people that may need our support.
I'm Rich Frazier.
And I'm Russ Fanos.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange, a podcast from IPM Advancement.
We believe strong nonprofits can change the world, and our goal with each episode is to bring you insightful conversations with thought leaders from the nonprofit sector.
Let's dive in. Welcome back, listeners, to the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. I'm your host, Rich Frazier. Today, we're looking at how inflation and the economy is impacting some of our nonprofit friends. Now, inflation rates began to surge in early mid-2021. They peaked about a year later, the highest they've been since 1981 at 9.1%. The increased cost of goods are making services and programs more expensive to run. Many social service and social justice nonprofits are seeing a higher demand for their services from constituents, and that's especially true for the two nonprofits joining us today, which we'll get into. Inflation also has an effect on fundraising. A dollar raised today doesn't have the same buying power as a dollar raised 10 years ago. In fact, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation calculator, a $100 contribution back in 2013 would need to be $130 today to have the same financial impact. So inflation can put more pressure on fundraisers to maintain the same level of service to the community. We're going to get into all of that, looking at it through the lens of two organizations working to alleviate food insecurity to serve people facing hunger. So let's meet our guests. Joining us today are Colbran, Director of Development at Feeding San Diego, and Nicole Williams, the CEO at Community Food Bank in Central Alabama. Nicole, welcome to the show. Would you mind telling listeners a little bit about your background in nonprofit fundraising, what your organization does, and your current role there? Let's hear from you first.
Sure. So I'm the Director of Development at Feeding San Diego, which is a hunger relief organization here in San Diego, California. We are a member of Feeding America. We're one of 200 food banks nationwide that have that distinction. And last year, we provided 35 million meals to the community that faces food insecurity in San Diego County. My personal background, I've been the Director of Development at Feeding San Diego for just over 6 years and have been fundraising for about 14. I started off in the arts and museum space and spent a lot of time fundraising for children's museums and the Birch Aquarium here in San Diego. But my calling really is human services and helping with basic needs. So my dream position opened up at Feeding San Diego, and I honestly haven't looked back since.
Fabulous. And thank you for joining us. And San Diego is one of our favorite places to be.
It really is the finest city.
And Nicole, thank you for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about the Community Food Bank of Central Alabama and your history there.
Hi, thank you for having me. So I'm Nicole. I'm from the Community Food Bank of Central Alabama. We serve 12 counties here in the center of our state. We too are a part of Feeding America, a proud member. Personally, I have been working in the nonprofit sector for about 30 years. So I started in programs and moved into fundraising probably in 2001, mostly at health and human services organizations. But like I actually went into arts and culture for a short time and missed that moment where I was really feeling like I was changing people's lives and helping them. So I actually joined the food bank in the middle of the pandemic in 2020. So
Wow.
I've only been with the organization for about 3 years, and it's amazing work. And I'm currently serving as the CEO.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for joining us. So I want to sort of start looking at how the last couple of years have impacted your organizations from a big, broad view. So can you paint that picture for us? How have your organizations been impacted by the economic changes that we've seen over the last couple of years? Nicole, why don't we start with you?
Wow, so much to talk about, right? How much time do we have? The need for, to feed people and to support people with food insecurity in our communities is a very large need, and has been there way before the pandemic began. But the community recognized food as a basic need during the pandemic, maybe more than ever before. So where many other nonprofits maybe suffered during the pandemic, people really recognized us. At least I can speak for my food bank in terms of recognizing the need for food assistance, and people who gave gifts to support our cause. We had 20 employees in 2019. I now have 50 employees. So we have grown tremendously, serving more people, and now on the back end of trying to figure out where the economy is and how we can maintain those level of service when we are dealing with inflation, changes in food pricing, and then donors kind of going back to some of their regular giving and not having food insecurity top of mind.
So there was a thing that happened during the pandemic. There was a lot of federal subsidy to organizations so that we could provide services to those who needed it. But now that funding is going away. A lot of organizations like yours ramped up their services, ramped up their staff, but that need, because of the economy, didn't necessarily decline. What are you seeing in terms of decline in donors now that some of that federal subsidy is going? Your staff is still at 50. The need is still heavy out there in the community. How do you sustain that?
It's a real challenge. It really is. Yes, the funding through the federal government was amazing during that time, but you're right. We don't want to serve less people. So I'm being creative now and making sure we're growing our programs in all different directions, and all sources of food and funding is really important. And then on the donor side of things, we really have to make sure that we are stewarding donors, that we continue to be top of mind, that we continue to keep people interested and helping us join the fight against hunger, so that we are not feeding less, but continue to feed more.
Allie, I'm guessing that you're seeing a lot of this in San Diego as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, what Nicole just said, you can almost substitute Feeding San Diego for the Community Food Bank of Central Alabama, and it'd be very similar to the same story. Feeding San Diego is pretty unique in the food banking in space, in that the majority of the food that we distribute is rescued. So, just to kind of go into what food rescue is, it's essentially rescuing food that would otherwise be thrown away. So it's, cans with, a dent in it, or things from the grocery store that they're cycling out. That's perfectly good. That's perfectly, edible, all those things, but it's just going to go to the landfill. So before the pandemic, 97% of all of our food was rescued, which means that when the pandemic hit and there's a run on the grocery store, because everyone's sheltering in place, they're stocking up. The grocery stores that we used to get food from didn't have food for us because their shelves were clean. And so we had to pivot to purchasing more food. Before the pandemic, we purchased around $300,000 worth of food. At our height, we were purchasing over $10 million worth of food in a year because we had to, because we didn't have, first, the need had skyrocketed, but also the food rescue wasn't available. Luckily, that has returned, right? Everyone's shopping normally. No one's stockpiling their pantries in the same way. So pretty locally, that has returned to normal. But because of the need, we are still purchasing. We're planning to purchase about $3 million worth of food this year. So about what?
You're spending
10
times
increase.
more for food than you were in 2019.
Yeah, even after kind of normalizing.
So food costs are up. As I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is decreased or gone away. I'm curious about how your partnerships with local businesses, suppliers, and donors have changed.
So we went from doing about maybe 500 or 600 food rescue pickups across the county every week, which is already a lot. We do over 860 pickups every week locally across the county from every grocery store you can think of in California, we're picking up from. We also rescue from Starbucks, et cetera. So maximizing rescue is a big strategy for us. We've also, pivoted to maximizing produce. So up close to half of what we distribute is produce. It's kind of a perfect thing to distribute because although it does have some limitations because of it's definitely not shelf stable and sometimes it needs to be refrigerated and things like that. But it is more affordable for us to get compared to purchased dry goods. So purchased dry goods, on average costs Feeding San Diego about 80 cents a pound. But for us to get fresh produce, it costs us about 16, 17 cents a pound. On the same side, the people we serve, when they're stretching the limited grocery budget that they may have, they're typically not going to get fresh produce because it's expensive and it's not shelf stable. So we're able to supplement, right? They might be able to go to the grocery store and get their staple goods, but they aren't able to afford fresh produce. But Feeding San Diego can be the place where they supplement their grocery budget with that.
Right. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole, what are you seeing in Alabama?
We do about 20 million pounds of food every year. Last year, 8 million pounds of that was fresh produce. But the 4 areas that we get food from are USDA. Last year, about 28% of our food came from the USDA. 44% of our food came from retail reclamation or rescue, as Allie has described. About 1% of our food comes from the community. And then the last place is we purchase food. But the 2 areas that we've really tried to grow are we grew our team with retail reclamation to make sure that we were building good relationships with grocery stores in our areas. And we've increased the amount of food that we've gotten through reclamation. And that's been really, really important to us. And as Allie said, it's really good food. It's not expired food or food that is bad. And that's important to know. And we also put someone in a role to do food drives. I think there's a misconception that food banks, get food from people that do food drives and we give out canned goods. And that's true. But 1% of our food comes from the community. And so that is certainly an area where we could grow and people can get involved. Food drives are easy to do too. I mean, you can have kids go through the neighborhood and collect peanut butter in their wagon, or you can have a large corporation do a big food drive, get people to come in. We had a school last year that did a food drive and they brought cereal boxes and then they set them up in the hallway like Legos and the whole school came out to see the Legos fall down.
Yeah, I love that.
There are a lot of really fun ways to engage the community to give back for food drives. So that's kind of an investment we made in a staff person to do better with that.
I actually love what you just mentioned, Nicole, about the kid bringing the wagon and collecting peanut butter. We have when we do food drives, we have a list of items that are preferred for us to receive. One of the things that we do we're very careful with our food drives. We actually don't encourage them as a primary way to support Feeding San Diego, and a lot of that is because, frankly, you or I going to the grocery store and buying $25 worth of food that we could donate to the food bank, to Feeding San Diego, that $25 being donated to us can go so much further. So we really do encourage people to kind of do virtual food drives or fund drives instead of actual food drives. That said, we do them a lot. People want to do that. They like the idea of actually giving food. So we have a list of items, and peanut butter and nut butters are on there because I don't know about you guys, Nicole, but peanut butter is not something we get donated in pallets for because it's so shelf stable. It's not something that usually comes to our warehouse that way. So I always say, if you are participating in a food drive, bring peanut butter, bring almond butter, bring something like that, because it's always going to be needed by the food bank.
So Allie, I'm fascinated by what I think I heard you say earlier, is that it's actually more cost effective for you to provide fresh produce to your constituents than it is canned goods.
Correct.
Which is the inverse of what it costs me when I go to the grocery store, because fresh produce is the most expensive thing that I find in the grocery store, and I do all the grocery shopping. So clearly that you both have taken measures to ensure the quality of services that you provide to your clients and your constituents remains consistent.
Mhm.
So let's shift then into fundraising. Nicole, you talked about great donor stewardship earlier. Ali, you just brought up the excellent point that, hey, don't go buy $25 worth of groceries. Give me $25. We can do more with it than you can.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, how you have adjusted your budget or fundraising strategies to accommodate inflation or the economic downturn in your operations. And Ali, I'm going to come back to you. Oh, no, I'm going to go to Nicole.
Well, I was just going to mention, to Allie's point, in 2019, we often said, give me a can of green beans or give me $1.25 and I can buy 4 cans of green beans. That's what I love to say, right?
Mhm.
Well, then we went into the pandemic. Then we had supply chain issues. Then we have inflation with food, right? I can't actually buy 4 cans of green beans anymore with that amount of money. So we're still encouraging more, but I think that's why we also went to the push to start doing more food drives and again, just making sure we're getting donors to donate in whatever way works for them. We are still able to maximize a lot of those funds, so that's great, but that fluctuates with the economy and the cost of food and supply chain and freight costs and gas prices and all of that that's happening in our world.
Hi, this is Curtis Schmidt, producer of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. If you're a nonprofit professional who has questions about your program, or maybe you feel like you've taken your advocacy, fundraising, or membership effort as far as you can and you need some fresh ideas, then we have a special offer for you today. NPFX podcast listeners can get a free 30-minute consultation with IPM Advancement, no strings attached, when you go to ipmadvancement.com/free. Just enter a few details and an IPM team member will contact you to follow up. It's that easy. That website again is ipmadvancement.com/free. Thanks for listening, and we hope to talk to you soon. Now let's return to the episode.
Ali, what kind of strategy changes have you all implemented?
Well, just in terms of messaging and transparency, to Nicole's point, one of the kind of nice things about the sort of hunger relief space is that you can really quantify a donor's impact. So before the pandemic, $1 donated to Feeding San Diego helped provide 4 meals. So $1 went really, really far. Because of inflation and rising costs and all of that, and our pivot to having to purchase more food, $1 now donated to Feeding San Diego now provides 2 meals. So it has reduced the impact of a dollar, but it's still far more impactful. The 4 of us can't get 2 meals for $1 anywhere. So it's still more effective to donate to Feeding San Diego if you're trying to maximize the impact of your donation. And I'll echo what Nicole said at the top of how important donor stewardship is. We received this huge influx of new donors, new people who were becoming aware of our mission and of who we are and what we were doing. And so keeping those donors engaged and apprised of the work that we're doing, of the challenges that we're facing, that's been a huge part of what our development department is focusing on, particularly in the online space. That was where we saw the largest increase. We've always had a pretty strong online presence, but COVID just blew that up, right? Like most of our new donors were coming online. So we've been able to invest in some kind of more sophisticated platforms, I guess, email platforms in particular that are allowing us to segment and, speak to really donor-centered communication and stewardship, which is leading us to have, we just did some reporting for the last year, and I'm really proud that we have a retention rate that's, about 8 to 9% higher than the national average right now. So
that's outstanding.
That was really
I was going to
exciting.
ask about that. I mean, you both have talked about having to shift your messaging to donors to talk about, hey, our buying power is not what it used to be, and the struggle is real. We're having to do more with less, or buy less with more, whatever that message is, right? So I'm curious, what are what are you seeing from donors, how their behavior is changing in response to that messaging?
Well, I think that's a good point. So, retention in this case that I just spoke of, we're talking about the donor, giving again, right? That simple act of they gave last year and they gave again. What is happening though is we're seeing they're giving less. And even that was actually our retained donors are giving a little bit less, but it's actually the new donors that we're acquiring. We're still acquiring them at a similar rate as, year over year, but their entry point donation is far lower than it was. We saw a lot, and I'm sure you had the same thing, Nicole. So many, and it warms my heart, but so many $1,200 and $2,400 gifts during 2020 when people got their stimulus check, they turned right around and they donated it to Feeding San Diego. It's wonderful. But those folks at the same time, when we, go back to them and ask for their support again, I can't give you that much, but they're able to give us what they can, $25, $50, $100. One thing that was really eye-opening and kind of flagged us last year was we have a recurring giving program that, we work with Classy on. So people, commit to $50 a month in their credit card runs. And that program has grown so much, but more than in years past by a lot, our donor services team who handles those like phone calls and all the administration for that program, they shared that they were getting so many calls from people who are canceling their monthly donation because they couldn't afford it.
Oh,
it was now our donors in some cases are now people that may need our support.
and I think that's striking, right?
Yeah.
So that to me looks like a direct impact of economic downturn. I mean, that
Yeah.
sounds like people are losing their jobs. And so,
Mhm.
Nicole, are you seeing the same thing in Alabama?
Yes, we are. As Ali said, people were giving full stimulus checks, to the food banks, which is amazing. They had more disposable income because they weren't going out, right? They weren't
Mhm.
eating out. People weren't
Right.
using gas, if they were, in their homes or furloughed. And so now that the world is, kind of gotten back to normal and people are in their normal lives, have more budget items, they're having less disposable income or income that they're willing to give to a nonprofit. So
Mhm.
I think, as the Feeding America Network, we have been somewhat prepared
Mhm.
that it would go down, but unsure how much it would go down. So I think that those are the challenges over these past few years, on the backside of the pandemic, is to see where we're going to kind of level off. I will say, for the positive spin of it, our food bank went from 800 donors to 8,000 donors in 2 years, which is
Wow.
crazy ridiculous. So, and amazing that the community came out to support us. So, our challenge again is to keep those donors involved and engaged in our mission. And so many of them gave just knowing it was the right thing to give to food insecurity. And so now our challenge is to get them to actually come to the food bank, to see our operations, to truly understand the huge impact that we're having in people's lives, right here, their neighbors, right, next.
How are you doing that, Nicole? How are you keeping those donors engaged?
I mean, the ways to get people involved are, they can volunteer, and we host 8,000 volunteers a year here at our food bank, and they help build mobile pantry boxes and sort food. It's a huge, huge opportunity. It's so much fun. Families can come and bring their children. Corporations can come. They love to compete to see who can build more boxes. And we really, really have put a lot into making that a really good and meaningful experience. So if you come and build mobile pantry boxes, at the end of your shift, we'll say you built this many boxes and you just provided this many meals to your neighbors or to families right here in Central Alabama. So a meaningful volunteer experience is really important, for us here. We also are doing other things. This week I had a little, what we call a lunch and learn, and we invite our donors to come in and tour the warehouse and spend some time with me. I'm just talking about our mission and the need here. And those have been really, really successful. So I always invite people to come here to the food bank when they can, to see what we're doing. It's very impactful to actually see it and see it in action and see the forklifts moving around. And most people don't know that we're as big of an operation as we are. They're actually shocked when they walk in and they see our warehouse, and they're surprised.
I was going to ask for sort of a positive spin, a positive takeaway. And Nicole, you certainly gave us that. Allie, I want to come to you now and ask you for that positive takeaway that you've seen in San Diego.
One of the things that has been kind of a bright spot has been our corporate volunteering. So as Nicole mentioned, volunteers are the lifeblood of our organization. We had over 23,000 volunteers support Feeding San Diego last year. And a lot of those are families and things like that. But even more so, a lot of them are corporate groups. And, corporations are, some of them have fared better than others in this, throughout the last couple of years. And, some of them stepped up and really gave, we actually had a company donate a 6-figure gift to us, and it was their travel budget for the year in 2020. They couldn't travel anymore, right?
Wow.
So that entire travel budget went to Feeding San Diego to help people in San Diego.
Can you publicly acknowledge who that company is? Because that is such a great idea, and I just want to give a shout out to whoever that is.
Yeah, so the company that did this was Calpine Energy Solutions. And it was an unexpected gift of $130,000 to Feeding San Diego. And it, like I said, it was their travel budget. And
what a great way
isn't that amazing? Yeah.
To pivot.
Yeah, it was great. So, but one of the things that we have been encouraging our corporate partners with, and they've been really receptive. And I think particularly folks in the fundraising and nonprofit space were always afraid of, spooking people, right? But the corporations we work with have really, I think, responded well to, we are really encouraging. And in some months, the holiday months, we are requiring that corporate groups that come in with larger groups, so in excess of, I think it's 30 folks or more, they make a gift as well, a donation. They give a gift of time, but they also give a corporate gift. And most, if not all, corporations are, we'd love to. We'll go to Feeding San Diego and volunteer as a team together instead of going bowling, and give the funds to Feeding San Diego. And that has been really, really great to see corporations really, embracing that and understanding that. So I've been, that's been a really great positive turn that we've seen over the last couple of years.
And those are great team building activities too.
Yeah.
We're getting close to the wrap up section, but before we wrap up, I want to ask if you have any advice for other nonprofit leaders who are listening today. And I'm going to plant a seed here, going back to the conversation we had about the donors who had to stop their recurring gifts because they just couldn't afford to give anymore. It doesn't mean that they have to stop helping, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, there's an opportunity for some peer-to-peer encouragement, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, for the folks that, whenever we have a monthly donor kind of cancel their recurring gift, about a year ago, we implemented kind of a follow-up strategy of first thank them and quantify how, say they were giving $5 a month for 3 years or something like that. We always have a thank you for that time, and we quantify, your donation of, I can't do math that fast, $180, provided 360 meals. Thank you. And then these are other ways that you can help. And the very first thing we're going to ask is you can volunteer.
Right.
So, but also I actually have to say, pivoting those folks into fund drive people that are going to host a fund drive, I think that's a great idea. Something we haven't actually put into. So you just gave me an idea that I think we're going to put into our follow-up, because having that idea of, mobilizing their network to give back as a way they can still support Feeding San Diego is a fabulous idea. So I'm going to bring that back to the team. But one piece of advice that I would, talking about that recurring giving, while that was an example of where we saw that drop off, our overall recurring giving program has been the brightest bright spot of some of our fundraising over the last couple of years. Before the pandemic, we had about 100 donors that were giving to Feeding San Diego every month on Class C. Now we have coming close to 1,300 donors that give a recurring gift every single month. And that has slowly continued. We see a little bit of a decline, but it has rebounded and it continues to grow. And one of the ways, it is not, this is not news to any fundraising professionals out there that matches are really effective, right? Being able to have a match is a great way. But one of the things, we've actually used a match for getting people to join recurring programs. So we've had 2 campaigns where a donor will match new recurring donors the first 3 months of their recurring gift. So, using combining that power of a match to get people to commit long term has been really successful for us. When we've done those campaigns, we get typically about 3 times as many new recurring donors in that period when we have the match than without. So it's been a really effective tool for us. And then we can count and budget longer term because we know that revenue is coming in.
That's a cool idea.
Mm-hmm.
Nicole, what's happening with the Food Bank of Central Alabama in terms of advice that you can provide others?
Yeah, we also do the reoccurring donors. And I think that's been a trend in fundraising over the past several years, I suppose. But, it's just an easier way for people who don't want to give in one lump sum, and they can give up a cup of coffee every month or what have you. We call ours meal makers, and we do some special things for them, for doing those gifts. But I love the thought of, community organizing too, as getting your peers involved. When we have a corporation that does a food drive, we also offer for it to be a food and fun drive. So people can give a donation online. We have a system where we can set up teams, and, corporate groups love to compete again with one another. So we do something called the Legal Food Frenzy, and we pit all of the law groups against each other to raise more funds and food during, a period of time. And that's kind of a fun thing to do. We also have done a food and fun drive with all of the breweries in our area. We call it Hops for Hunger.
Nice.
That's cute.
And we've got a big trophy that goes to the brewery that brings in the most food and funds during the month of October. So it's a fun way to get maybe, a younger crowd or people that are out to socialize, but also learning about the food bank and supporting.
Nicole, we do that similar thing. Ours is called Food from the Bar. It's very punny.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's really successful.
Mhm.
Okay, so speed round answers from each of you. What's one thing you want listeners to take away from this conversation? Anything that we've talked about, or even something that we haven't brought up? Nicole, you first.
Oh, wow. I mean, the one thing I always say in media interviews is if you know someone that needs food, please have them look for their nearest food bank. On our website, we have a Find Food button, and it lists every distribution that we have. That's the most important tool. What we're here to do, and our mission is to feed people. And to me, that is always the number one message.
Yes. Allie.
I'll say don't give up. Relationships are so important, and the stewardship that we do. I'll share one example that my fellow fundraisers that are listening will hopefully resonate with. Fundraising can be, you have to get used to rejection. You have to get used to no. You have to get used to being, the only one reaching out and nobody gets back to you a lot of the time. But I had, an experience maybe a year ago where I'd been trying to get in touch with the donor to thank her, and I'd leave her messages, I'd email her, she'd never get back to me. And one time she got back to me. I said, yay. But what she said to me, she said she couldn't come to whatever I had invited her to, but she said, just so you know, I see these emails and I get your voicemails, and I know I can't respond, but it matters. It matters when I decide, at year end. I could have paid her to say that to me, and it was exactly what I needed to hear in that moment. But the act of stewardship and reaching out, even though, sometimes it feels like it's not working, it really is. So don't give up.
And that validation is so very important.
Yeah.
And what she's saying is, your organization, your mission matters. But
Yeah.
sometimes what the fundraiser is hearing is you matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what you're doing matter.
Yeah, you're right.
Hey, Allie, Nicole, first of all, thank you so very much for the work that you do that
Thank you.
takes care of your fellow humans, coast to coast. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for joining us on the show today. Truly fascinating and remarkable conversation. It's been a joy to visit with both of you. Where can listeners find out more about you and the organizations you work for? Allie.
So feedingsandiego.org, you'll learn all about Feeding San Diego. And I'd love for people to look me up on LinkedIn. It's Allie Colbran, Feeding San Diego on LinkedIn.
Super. Nicole.
Yeah, well, you can find us at feedingal.org.
Awesome. Thank you. Again, thank you to Allie Colbran and Nicole Williams for joining us. Thank you to our producer, Curtis Schmidt, and to my co-host and friend, Russ Faniff. Everywhere we are, you and I were meant to be. And to you, our listeners, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange.
That concludes this episode of the Nonprofit Fundraising Exchange. Thanks to our panel for sharing their insights and expertise. If you'd like to learn more about our panel members or any of the organizations or resources featured in this episode, we will include links in the show notes. If you like this podcast, we would love your help spreading the word. First, please subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app so you always know when a new episode is released. Second, forward the episodes you like to friends and colleagues or share them on social media. Word of mouth is one of the best ways you can help us reach more nonprofit professionals like yourself. And if you use Apple Podcasts or Audible, please leave us a review. Positive reviews are how many listeners decide whether or not to try out a new podcast. We appreciate your help. For suggestions on topics, guests, or nonprofit organizations you'd like to hear on the podcast, send an email with the subject heading NPFX suggestion to contact@ipmadvancement.com. For back episodes and more resources like white papers, infographics, and blog articles, please visit the free IPM Advancement Nonprofit Resource Library at ipmadvancement.com/resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.